Peter said to me in one of the first meetings, I want these ships to feel as though they're countries in their own right, bobbing out in the middle of these vast seas. This almost organic, living, breathing entity. And up above the crew is this living creature, this huge mass of canvas and ropes flapping in the wind, reacting to the elements that have been thrown at this incredible vessel.
We just felt it was best to do a two-pronged attack because we really didn't know which one was going to be the most efficient.
Firstly, what you would love to have is both vessels, fully manned and armed, even if you have them in a tank. But that's just too costly.
My experience dealing with Peter Weir, we were both unsure exactly which would be the best approach. So we built a CG ship and built the model ship. As it turns out, they both work pretty well against each other.
We've had shots that we tried the model and we tried the CG boat and then we went back to the model again. We thought a sailing boat is a sailing boat. It's not.
If you could grab some rope and we'll quickly tie off onto them, and then when you jerk them...
And do you want one bit of rope, one bit of rope for each rope?
Say 3 ropes, that's all the time.
This thing is so organic. You've got a lot of flexible parts of the boat. If we're doing an aircraft carrier, it's one thing. You don't have a lot of things that can sit there and sway around. But the sailing boat, plus all the personnel that are on the sailing boat, things like that. We were doing our sail simulators and our rope simulators while shooting was going on down in Mexico, just trying to get the dynamics of the rope to portray exactly the same way the sailing boats did it, and everything's moving on that boat, bar the inanimate parts, which is probably the hull and the mast, but then the masts even have flex in them when they're under strong sail. And then the more you look at this boat and what makes it look real is this organicness, and everything on the boat just about moves.
The decisions were made based on what Peter wanted to see, how he wanted the ships to perform. Oftentimes a model would work better simply because we could match the lighting, one time just shoot it, boom, go. But that very same thing might cause us to use CG in that the lighting wasn't correct on the model or couldn't be achieved on the model, or Peter at a later time decided that maybe the model wasn't moving in quite the way he wanted it to. Those are the things that mostly drove the decision. You really shouldn't be able to tell between the Rose, the tank surprise, or the model surprise, or the CG surprise for that matter.
Whenever you build miniatures, the natural tendency is to try and build them as big as possible. We ultimately end up building some pretty big miniatures, and so we've coined the phrase bigatures because these things quite often fill whole sound stages. We're building the Surprise at 6th scale and the Acheron at 8th scale. We've also built another set of rigging for the Acheron at 8th scale for a number of gags where it has to be exploded, fall over, get damaged, and so on and so forth. We've pounded them with tons of water, wind has thrashed and ripped into the sails. They've been on these huge gimbals that rock them as if they're riding on the high seas.
Got it. Thanks.
We started in about June of 2002. And our CG boats were ready probably about 6 to 7 months later. And from that time till now, we've continued to increase the quality of the boat. Oftentimes I'll describe it to people who may not be that familiar with the process as if they're trying to build it for real. Well, what would you do? You may start with some kind of framework. Well, that framework might be chicken wire. In our case, it's a wire-frame digital representation of that. And once we have that, once every piece is modeled and every piece is created, then they have to be textured. They have to be wrapped or painted in some kind of surface that will match. For that, we have a department that paints textures, texture painters. And they use photographic reference and actual just painting skills to recreate the surfaces of every piece of the boat. So once we have the textures wrapped onto the boat, then we have to animate that boat. We have to make it move. It goes to our animation department. They'll actually work with the wireframe while the texturing is being done, but they will create the movement of the boat. We also had another team working on the sails, who would create a sail, a fabric simulation, and then apply wind and all these kind of things to it to make it move in a realistic fashion.
We had some advantages with the miniatures, the organicness that you got with the real sails there. Even though they are miniatures, they still performed accordingly to the wind. As wind spills off one sail and hits into another sail, it's not just them all blowing at the same time. There's a lot of wind moving over the front of a sail as opposed to the wind moving over the back of the sail.
Because if you copy reality exactly at a smaller scale, ultimately it will look exactly right. What has been the true and real challenge is the canvas, the sails, these incredibly organic, these hugely lively pieces of fabric. We went to Hong Kong to have the fabric woven at the correct weight with the right amount of lycra in it, because if we didn't get the right feeling to the fabric, the ships wouldn't look right. If you're out on the high seas, well, God's wind is this infinite wind that hits these sails from a constant direction. Here in the studio, the best we've got is huge fans, and we're trying to make the sails feel as though they are really full with natural wind, and that's been one of the great challenges.
Kind of recede that mast a little bit. So
You can have it travel across frames slowly.
So you want me to hinge on it, or just
hinge.
In some of the wider shots where the tank boat showed that the topmasts weren't there because they physically couldn't be added onto, we extended them, taking topmast material from the real Surprise at Sea, from the real ship that was shot, and then also some from the miniature, and combining those and pasting those into those shots that from the tank boat that were missing.
The sail configuration had to match from scene to scene, and it had to be correct seamanship. I mean, Peter absolutely demanded that everything be as correct as possible, which is good. It actually made our job easier in that it took a lot of the guesswork out later. So we knew what had to happen. The sails had to perform a given way, or the rigging had to be in a certain position. But those things weren't big problems that we had to overcome. It was simply building them. Once it was built, putting it in the right place, as per Peter and Andy Ray Ellers, our technical consultant.
Their level of dedication to this is just the same as everyone else. The accuracy they're working towards there is amazing. I mean, they're asking me, when the line is pulling on the sail, where's the stress in that sail? And as a ship rocks, how much does the cloth stretch? Do you think that's a factor of 10% of stretch? Is that where the belly of the sail comes from? It's mind-boggling.
We even looked at real footage that was shot of the sailing rows and was referencing that, and the amount of times the boat doesn't even have a wake, and the amount of times it looked like a bad composited boat and it's a real shot was astounding. So we studied as much of the footage that we had shot, obviously being out on the boat and bringing our CG guys down so they can look at this stuff and bring back references of everything they need, going out and sailing, seeing what ropes bring what sails up, and it was an interesting experience. These guys loved getting down there and getting hands-on experience with seeing the way the stuff sailed.
That was our first challenge, is to get the flow of the movie and the flow of the movie on a battle sequence straight away. All of a sudden we're dealing with the tank, we're dealing with the battle, we're dealing with water, we're dealing with all the aspects right in the very beginning of the film.
The Surprise is first attacked by the Acheron. It's pretty well decimated by those cannonball hits. Some of that was done on set with squibs and explosions and sawdust and things like that. But it didn't have as much impact as Peter would have wanted. Again, digital effects can help there. We had a group of guys downstairs, led by Tom Linus, who created exploding pieces of the boat. So we have explosions going off right next to their heads, things breaking off and flying around that never actually broke or flew around.
So without going too over the top, maintaining some reality in there, trying to show the impact of what a cannonball does do and the devastation that it causes upon impact is more the point than, let's say, ignite some, you know, flashbangs in the background and everybody's been blown up. It's the damage that the ball does and the shrapnel and debris that it causes is what does most of the damage on the boat.
Basically what's happening on this one is as the French come up alongside, they're just on patrol. They think that they're just seeing a harmless whaler. And as they come up alongside, then Russell Crowe gives the command, show the colors. They whip off their whaler outfits. They're all in their British outfits and stuff. And we go down the line and all these hatches open up one by one. So this shot that we're doing is just sort of dramatic, almost a bit of a Busby Berkeley sort of thing where we're coming down low, coming across them, and as they come into frame, they open, cannons come out, and then just start firing, taking the French totally by surprise. Great. We're pre-dressing all the damage, and as we go by, you'll see the damage from the very first of the frame. But later on, what Asylum will do is paint out that damage and make it look like a pristine piece of rail. And then when our balls go past, they can comp in larger scale debris exploding and falling off to the sides and then revealing our damage that's left over. So we get a certain amount of damage and rigging being taken out. On the other boat on the other side, there's gunfire coming from high above, shooting at the crew that are on the deck. So we're using our air cannons in order to simulate and get all that sort of violent movement in the rigging and in the sails.
Cut! You've been putting yourself in all day.
Very simple, painted black.
What weight are they?
Just 2 ounce.
The biggest challenge for the opening battle sequence can be said in one word, and that's fog. The opening battle takes place in a huge fog bank, or with a huge fog bank, and that wasn't really there.
Well, in the opening battle, the story is clear. We must differentiate between what lies ahead and where they've come from. Yeah, this is where we're coming from. So, okay, there is some greyishness, there is some pale light coming up. And I'll tend, I think, in the grading to take this down as much as we can.
Yeah, so that you just don't have these flat white skies that you get sort of a moodier, darker feeling.
Exactly, yeah.
Peter had very distinctive feelings about the moods for each battle sequence, the time of day, the progression of time over the course of a battle, and so it was certainly important for him to be able to control that later on in post-production. And yet, because we are controlling all these elements, we have to be very careful to still get a very natural and realistic look out of them and not give the sense of, wow, suddenly we're in visual effects land or doing something which is not realistic. This would be the one where he's making the changes. So I think in some way adding more structure in here is not necessarily the right thing.
No.
But the visual reference that we got from Peter was very interesting because it was mostly paintings. There are a lot of very strong and impactful paintings from that period, and he had a collection of maybe a dozen to 20 of those where he said, you know, this is a great painting of a battle. Look at the smoke, look at how the flames are spitting from the cannon fire from one boat to the next. This is the feel I want to get. It was interesting because the challenge was to achieve that sort of effect and yet not have suddenly a shot that looked like a postcard in the middle or a painting in the middle of this very realistic film with all this other action going on. And really creating that sense of two ships in a ferocious battle. And so our task has been combining the miniatures and creating realistic, absolutely authentic scenes of ships battling. That's really quite a challenging amount of layering going on with all the different smoke elements. Again, we're using real elements of smoke, not computer-generated ones, which we could have done, and staying with those and just artfully layering them in order to get just the right balance.
There's anything from enhancing the rain and just, you know, getting a little more stormy feel to the shot by adding in some more practical rain elements, and then sort of some of the in-between complexity shots, which would be maybe adding a little stormy water in the distance beyond the people on the boat, and that goes all the way up to sort of the wide shots where we're taking the boat, placing it into stormy water and making things interact with the water.
the Endeavour, that wonderful, beautifully, accurately recreated vessel of Captain Cook's, three-masted square rigger, was, just as we were about starting pre-production, was going round the Horn the other way. So we got a cameraman and camera on board to shoot their passage around the Horn and to film the ocean in that part of the world. And we got some sensational, plates, as we call it, to build into our film.
The Endeavour plates was actually the catalyst of the creation of the storm. It's like, if I didn't have that organic element, I would have had to have been doing it in a probably a different format, and that would have probably been CG water. And we were just very lucky that there was a storm which occurred, and the Endeavour had a great film crew on it. And I think that we would have been rerouting ourselves in different ways if that storm didn't happen. We could have been doing CG water, or we would have been out chasing storms again. And we were lucky that we got a storm early, and got the ball rolling. In my thought process, I still like to have organic elements and use the technology to marry them, because I just feel that that's, nothing can beat the real thing.
And that's in general been the feeling when Peter approached this project, that he did want to create as much of it from reality, that he did not want artificial elements going into this, and that's why he was even initially hesitant to use any computer-generated boats. And so, I'd done the perfect storm and created all of this digitally, and just having the benefit of having real photography of such a stormy sea and using those elements, layering them together, really brought a great sense of reality to that sequence.
You can get CG water very close these days, but it's just, you can always tell. You can always tell that there's just something not quite real about it. Water is such an incredibly complex thing, and the physics of it and the way it interacts with the light and the way light passes through it are just things that you can't quite 100% simulate yet. So at the end of the day, I decided to stay away from the CG water as much as we possibly could, and instead try to layer together practical elements to build up this big storm.
We took the elements from the Endeavour and created a jigsaw puzzle out of them, and we built a storm with a lot of depth. It's just a very careful, deconstruction of the Endeavour footage, and then a deconstruction then of that footage itself, and then a layering format just to build the depth which you wouldn't get just out of shooting it as one shot.
The plates were shot on second unit out in the Pacific Ocean, but oftentimes the weather conditions, again, were not exactly what we may have wanted. So we created a library of various weather conditions and lighting conditions for the water, and when we were given the direction from Peter what he wanted the water to do, we would find the best element for the job and then create a color palette that would match. And oftentimes we would have to change the direction of the water, be it flipping it, running it backwards, or doing something we call corner pinning, which is to pull the edges, basically, of the image to force the water to move in a given direction.
The biggest challenge in making the storm real really was being able to get all these elements to track together, and then in amongst those elements place a boat and place a whole bunch of atmosphere and get everything to interact properly. It was just really a very large number of elements, which are not particularly easy to work with. I mean, keying the edge of a wave as it moves around is not an easy thing. I mean, it sort of comes down to just sort of like fairly traditional compositing techniques, but just a lot of hard work and a lot of painstaking rotoscoping and painstaking tracking and that kind of thing.
I mean, the compositing process itself, you have to deal with edges, you have to deal with depth of field, you have to deal with grain structure, color, of course, all of these things. It's a pretty complicated process.
For shots where we needed interaction with people, like waves hitting people and that kind of thing, we used the tank boat in Baja. And then for wider shots, some of the time at least, where where people are much further away, we used the model boats and added some CG people and maybe some CG parts to those boats.
When you shoot a miniature, of course, they're completely uninhabited by anybody. And so now, these days, we have the advantage of really being able to populate the boats, making them look like there are sailors on there so that you're not taking out of it by suddenly the lack of people in those wider shots.
The Acheron obviously needed people on it, so we had to build a crew. So we built a simulated CG sailing crew, and so we even added that simulated sailing crew to the Weta models because we needed some life in the rigs.
Also, because of the scale that we've built these boats at, when we dump the water on them, due to the surface tension in the molecules of water, the scale is difficult to achieve. So we're using steam cleaners and water blasters and every possible effect to smash those molecules up to make them look smaller so the ships look bigger.
Mr. Holland! Help young Wally in the mizzen topgallant! I need more men, sir! Yes, go! Mr. Holland, sir! Help me! Oh! God! Help! Ah! Help me! Ah!
The sequence where the mast breaks, we did shoot a mast, or a part of a mast, falling into the water off the back of the boat, but it falls into a flat cam tank. We then sort of looked around all the footage that we had from the Endeavour going around Cape Horn and found the most appropriate splashes and waves and that kind of thing, and cut bits of them out and layered them together so that we could have the mast fall sort of in amongst these waves, the real practical stormy waves. And then of course adding like atmosphere and more splashes and that kind of thing on top of that. Same kind of thing with Worley himself. He's shot in the tank and we cut him out of the shot in the tank and tracked him into some of these huge stormy waves from Cape Horn. And so in the end it would have been very difficult to make this storm as believable without that Endeavour footage.
Travelling out there was once in a lifetime for sure. Just seeing a place that hadn't been touched, and we had to definitely portray that with the matte paintings and background replacements. Taking Mexico footage that was shot just past the Baja tank and making that look like the Galapagos, which doesn't look very much like the Galapagos after you've seen it with your eyes.
The real challenge was to make the grey cliffs of Baja look like the Galapagos Islands, which have a unique shape.
Action!
We had to accentuate the color.
A week? Mustn't we make haste for the mock cases?
I think we should be getting back.
And do sky replacements.
No boatswain's pipes out here, Mr. Blakely.
So you've got to, in your own mind, imagine there will be this great sort of E.T. like head coming out. You know,
It's about 25 matte shots of turning Baja into the Galapagos, intermixed with actual shots of the Galapagos. It's a very small team of people to actually do that, but the small team of people work directly with Peter. So those shots, each one of them, is a sort of reflection of what Peter wanted to have in the film.
A shrub, nonsense. I'll name a tortoise, giant tortoise, Testudo aubrai.
Peter had the opportunity to get this stuff in camera and looking good, but then, you know, some things didn't work to his timings or whatever, so can we tweak this, can we move that, can we throw a couple of animals in here?
Dean, you must carry him. Put those down, leave them, just put everything down.
Open the cages.
Adding in some of the wildlife that wasn't in shot, but as you'll see in the movie, a lot of the shots there, you couldn't get any better wildlife, real wildlife, unless you're shooting a documentary and you have the patience to sit there. But the animals in the Galapagos, they don't move. They're not scared of any humans. They don't know the threat of humans. So, you know, it was almost like they were art directed in the shot. You've got crabs there, you've got iguanas there, you've got sea lions in the foreground, birds in the background, and that was an amazing thing. So we could only add to that. We did a lot of cloning that needed to be added into our Mexico shots because we didn't have the wildlife abundance that the Galapagos obviously had. So we had some CG characters, we had some elements that we'd shot in the Galapagos and extracted those off those backgrounds, adding them into our plates, match moving them and tracking them into the footage that we had, and then obviously colour correcting and make them look like they should be in there.
Jack, I fear you may have burdened me with the debt I can never fully repay.
Tosh, name a shrub after me. Something prickly and hard to eradicate.
A shrub? Nonsense, I'll name a great tortoise after you.
And those are just elements that basically will give you a sense, again, just keeping it natural, keeping it real and not, and really just adding things in that you later on couldn't. Now, there were a few cases where that wasn't possible, and so that's where CG creatures were used very minutely. It's not something that Peter readily went to. He said, if you have something real, an element of a bird flying, this or that, and you may need to add something to it, let's start there rather than going all CG and going through that process.